Good morning. The first item of business this morning is consideration of business motion 7089 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on the suspension and variation of standing orders. Could I ask any member who wishes to speak against the motion to press the request to speak button now? And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 7089, Minister.
Formally moved.
Thank you. No member is asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, I will now put the question to the Chamber. Question is that motion 7089 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are. The motion is therefore agreed to. That brings us to the next item of business this morning, which is general questions. And in order to get as many people in as possible, I would prefer short and succinct questions and answers to match, please. Question number 1, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it considers that the prohibition of convicted prisoners from voting in elections is compatible with its commitment to incorporate the European Convention on Human Rights into an independent Scotland's written constitution.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
The Scottish Government's policy is that convicted prisoners should not be able to vote while they are in prison. The member is aware that this is the approach that has been taken in the Scottish Independence Referendum Franchise Bill for the referendum on independence. The franchise for elections is currently reserved.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm sorry that the Cabinet Secretary hasn't chosen to answer the question that I asked, which was about elections, not about the referendum. Having discussed this question at length with the Deputy First Minister in the Referendum Bill Committee, I'm still at a loss. Is there some principle by which the Scottish Government considers that the blanket prohibition on convicted prisoners voting is now legal under ECHR? Or is there some principle which suggests that a referendum should be conducted in a fundamentally different way than elections?
Cabinet Secretary.
No, we've made it quite clear that elections are currently dealt with by the UK. They are reserved and we seek to vary that. We do recognise the Scopola judgment in May 2012 and equally we are aware that there are 2 cases being heard before the Supreme Court at present to consider whether EU law gives convicted prisoners the right to vote in local and national elections and indeed European parliamentary elections. We await that outcome with interest. In terms of what a future independent Parliament's position would be, they would require compliance with the ECHR in terms of the legislation and indeed its interpretation, and that will be a matter for a future Scottish Parliament.
Thank you. Question number 2, Ian Gray.
To ask the Scottish Government what progress it is making on delivering the new Haddington Hospital.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, NHS Lothian is progressing the reprovision of the hospital, and South East Hubco has been appointed as the development partner. Work is underway to determine the size of facility required for the current and future needs of the East Lothian population and for those services provided to the whole of Lothian. It is expected that the first stage of the business case, the initial agreement, will be completed in September 2013, and it's anticipated that construction could start in 2015 with completion in 2017.
Ian Gray.
Deputy Presiding Officer, this hospital has been disappearing in front of our eyes for some years now. In 2007 it was promised to open in 2012. In 2008, the business case was promised in 2010. Since 2009-2010, we've heard really nothing of it, except that it would be delivered through the NPD programme. If the Cabinet Secretary is telling us now that it will be completed in 2017, what guarantee can he give to my constituents that it will not be pushed further to the back of the queue yet again?
Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, I am absolutely committed to this timetable and we will do everything we possibly can to ensure that it is adhered to. We recognise the importance of this project to the East Lothian health provision and to the local economy, and it is very much our intention to adhere to the timetable I have outlined this morning.
Thank you. Question number 3, Mary Scanlon.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to help people with mental health issues remain in employment.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, our new mental health strategy commits us to publishing guidance which promotes both the evidence base and good practice for what works in employability for those with mental illness. That work is underway and, when published, will encourage redesign both within health systems and the wider employability system to refocus practice on more effective approaches and to realise mental health care savings.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. The current work is very welcome. But 45% of people on benefits in Scotland have a mental health problem and find the journey back into work very long and hard. Is it not better to pursue a positive policy of helping people remain in work, and I welcome what the Minister said, Cabinet Secretary, on that issue, rather than allowing their condition to become chronic, severe and enduring? So will the Government commit to ensuring that this research is carried out, given that some companies have found that every pound spent on workplace health promotion and well-being has generated nearly £10 of savings in terms of reduced sickness absence and presenteeism?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I absolutely agree with the sentiments expressed by Mary Scanlon. Clearly, people with mental health problems who are in work should be given every support and every opportunity and every facilitation to retain their employment while dealing with their illness. And I'm happy to meet the member, perhaps along with Billy Watson, the chair of SAM, who is actually chairing the subgroup on this matter, to discuss the way forward.
Thank you. Question number 4, Sarah Boyack.
To ask the Scottish Government which policies in the draft Scottish planning policy will inform local authority development plans in relation to housing needs for older people.
Minister Margaret Burgess.
The draft Scottish planning policy is currently out for consultation until the 23rd of July 2013. The subject policy on enabling delivery of new homes proposes that plans should be informed by robust housing need and demand assessments, and that these should consider the needs of housing for older people. Where a need is identified, planning authorities should prepare policies to support delivery of appropriate housing and consider the allocation of specific sites.
Sarah Boyack.
I thank the Minister for that response. Given the significant increase projected for older people over the short term and particularly over the medium term, has the Minister any plans to review the process by which analysis should be carried out to do that forward planning for older people in our communities, given that in years to come we'll be looking not just at specialist housing, but that the general numbers of older people will mean that they will actually become people who need mainstream housing, and that we need to rethink our approach. Given that guidance was last reviewed in 2008, has the Minister any plans to look at this issue?
Minister.
Certainly in terms of housing, we're always looking at the issue of housing for older people, and it's very clear in the housing demand needs assessment that that is considered by the local authority, and they should be looking then further. We have 5-year supply that's looked at initially, but they should be looking at 20 years ahead in terms of land for housing and in terms of the housing need for their area, identifying the trends and the age, the longer longevity of people's lives, so they are expecting any requirements for an increase in specialist needs to be identified through that process.
Thank you. Question number 5, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I refer members to my register of interests as the cross-party chair for Showman? To ask the Scottish Government what action it can take regarding restrictions imposed on fun fair licences by local authorities.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
Licensing is a local matter. It is for local licensing authorities to look at the facts of individual applications and make decisions in light of local priorities and circumstances. The Civic Government Scotland Act 1982 makes clear that any conditions attached to a licence shall be reasonable.
Richard Lyle.
West Lothian Council are currently imposing conditions on fun fair licences which are not covered by any act of law, namely the erection of fencing around the entire fun fair, which makes the fair uneconomic, therefore causing several fun fairs at local gala days within their area being cancelled. What can this Parliament do to encourage councils to allow their constituents to enjoy all the fun of the fair by not imposing unrealistic conditions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do think it's right that local licensing authorities protect their communities by ensuring that fun fairs are operated safely and cause minimal nuisance. And it is correct, I think, that these matters should be set and dealt with locally. It is also the case, though, that these matters are important, that they should be proportionate and not have matters that are perhaps unnecessary. I do suggest that it may be best here at least to speak initially to the clerk of the committee and perhaps also the local divisional commander, because it would appear to me from the briefing I've got that there may be some room for some discussion in terms of what is in fact necessary. But I do believe ultimately these matters should be dealt with locally, but there should be some element both of proportionality and indeed also common sense.
Question number 6, Dave Thompson.
To ask the Scottish Government what progress it is making on attracting GPs to rural practices.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, I am grateful to the member, NHS Highland, the Dewar Group, Royal College of GPs and others whose advice has been invaluable on the key issue of recruiting GPs in remote and rural areas. This Government has promoted a range of initiatives to support GPs working in remote and rural areas with additional skills. These include the Remote and Rural Fellowship Scheme for newly qualified GPs and the Remote and Rural Healthcare Educational Alliance. Delivering safe and sustainable services in remote and rural areas, including island communities, is challenging. During my visit to Ardnamurchan on the 28th of January, I announced that NHS Highland had been commissioned to develop a proposal relevant to all remote areas of Scotland to look at new models of integrated healthcare delivery in line with the Healthcare Quality Strategy and the 2020 vision, and I'm glad to say that proposal is currently being finalised. I will then consider its advice carefully in the light of the recognised needs for alternative models of sustainable healthcare delivery in remote, rural and island communities.
Thank you. Dave Thompson.
Well, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply, and I thank him indeed for coming along to Ardnamurchan to visit the communities there. It was very useful indeed. The pilot he mentions, I know, is being developed, and a local doctor, Dr. Gartshaw, is working, I think, to create a much larger practice to replace the number of individual single GP practices. I just wonder if he can give me any further information of the timescale for implementation of this new pilot project.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, in terms of this project, a team of 8 doctors will work in 2 sub-teams, one based in Mallaig and the other in Arkirkle. NHS Highland are now working on the recruitment of suitable applicants that will ensure the continuation of out-of-hours services as well as the full range of routine care and treatment. And that's in addition to the investment we're making in telecare services in remote and rural areas specifically and across the wider health service network in particular.
Many thanks. Supplementary from Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The pilot is, of course, very welcome, but I wonder whether the Cabinet Secretary would consider the possibility of increased use of salaried GPs in remote, rural and island communities.
Alex Neil.
Absolutely, Presiding Officer. We're already looking at whether there are areas where the opportunity for salaried GPs would be more appropriate, where it's particularly difficult to recruit GPs to independent practices. Clearly, every option has to be explored because, quite frankly, we need to make sure that the remote, rural and island communities are as comprehensively covered as our urban communities by GP primary care services.
Thank you. Question number 7, Margot MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it considers that recent actions by Police Scotland reflect a change in emphasis in local policing.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
The new single police service provides an opportunity to adopt a national strategic approach, but at the same time recognise local circumstances. At the heart of this is a focus on keeping people safe and meeting the priorities of local communities. This commitment is shaped and delivered through engagement with partners and local people and is subject to scrutiny by local representatives to ensure that Police Scotland adopts the right approach to address the priority issues in each local community. The police have always taken enforcement action working with partners and local authorities and other agencies against those involved in criminality. Recent actions do not reflect a change in emphasis or approach, but demonstrate a cohesive response to eradicating criminality and protecting communities across Scotland.
Margot MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer, and I noted his earlier replies to Mr Lyle as regards the importance of local licensing. And I want an assurance from him, if it's possible, that there will be an emphasis placed on the continuance of what was considered to be a successful policy in managing prostitution in the Lothian and Borders area and Grampian area, as compared to the failure, relatively, of zero tolerance in Strathclyde.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think everybody, certainly in the east of Scotland, is aware of the less deaths that took place with regard to prostitution. It would be inappropriate for me to comment on any particular recent matter, especially some matters that are sub judice and have been dealt with. Suffice to say that where the police obtain intelligence of criminality, whether relating to trafficking, sexual exploitation, drugs, money laundering or other matters, it is important that it is acted upon. But I can give the member an assurance, having met with Assistant Chief Constable Malcolm Graham and indeed Chief Superintendent Ruth Gulfillan, who is in charge of the trafficking unit, that local matters will continue to prevail and other matters were simply the police, quite correctly and understandably, acting on intelligence.
Briefly, please, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I advise the Cabinet Secretary and indeed Margaret MacDonald that the Subcommittee on Policing should be dealing with any impact of the single force on local policing after recess, when, of course, members could raise any issues with that committee?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would welcome that. That's why the committee was established, and I think it's quite appropriate.
Thank you. Question number 8, Stuart Maxwell.
Can I point out to members that I am a member of the cross-party group on golf to ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to encourage golf tourism and what impact this will have on the West of Scotland economy?
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is determined to maximise tourism growth and draw more visitors to Scotland. Scottish Government public bodies are already working closely with the golf tourism industry to support the work of the Golf Tourism Development Group. The Open in Muirfield in 2013 staging the Ryder Cup in 2014 will reinforce Scotland's status as the home of golf and the perfect stage for events. Visit Scotland are capitalising on this unique opportunity with a specific programme of marketing activity designed to encourage more visitors, both international and domestic, to come to Scotland and to take advantage of nearly 600 golf courses across Scotland. In the west of Scotland, Scottish Enterprise is also working with the Ayrshire and Arran Golf Partnership and all 3 Ayrshire councils in the run-up to the Open at Royal Troon to build on their successful offering and ensure that the potential for golf is highlighted for all businesses in the area during the run-up to the event in 2016 and beyond.
Stuart Maxwell.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? The West of Scotland is well placed to capitalise from a boost in golf tourism with an array of excellent golf facilities, including courses on Arran and in East Renfrewshire, Renfrewshire and Dumbartonshire, as well as neighbouring world-class courses at Turnberry, Prestwick and Royal Troon. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that it's essential, however, that responsibility for air passenger duty is devolved to the Scottish Parliament to help secure more direct air links to Scotland and encourage golf enthusiasts from international markets to visit the home of golf?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Mr Maxwell makes a strong point in recognising the connection between international travel and connectivity through air links to bring visitors into Scotland to appreciate the significant opportunity around the range of golf courses in Scotland. The issue of devolution of air passenger duty was, of course, set out in the Calman Commission recommendations in June 2009. Ministers remain frustrated that the United Kingdom Government has not implemented that provision of the Calman Commission, despite the fact that such an approach has been taken in Northern Ireland, which represents a recognition by the UK Government that a one-size-fits-all policy simply does not work. And I would encourage the UK Government to respond to the very broadly based representations that have been made in Scotland, including from the 4 main airports, the Chambers of Commerce, SCDI and individual companies and the Scottish Government, for this power to be devolved to the Scottish Parliament.
Thank you. Briefly, please, John Scott.
Presiding Officer, the Cabinet Secretary will be aware that the loss of the Prestwick-Gothenburg's flights has had an adverse effect on golf tourism in the west of Scotland. He will also be aware of Minister Keith Brown's commitment to bring forward soon an EU-compatible successor scheme to route development funding. Can he tell us when that scheme will be put in place, and will he ensure that consideration is given to re-establishing the Scottish-Scandinavian link through Prestwick to support our golf tourism in the west of Scotland when it is put in place?
A brief answer, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, work is underway to take forward the preparation of the scheme that, to which Mr Scott refers. And of course priority is given to enhancing the connectivity of air routes in and out of Scotland, and the provisions in Prestwick would be important in that respect. Our efforts would of course be assisted if Mr Scott was able to use his formidable powers of persuasion with his colleagues in the United Kingdom Government to respond positively to my reasonable request about air passenger duty.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes general questions. Before we come to first